So you've been teaching your students writing all school year, you've taught them every single step of the process, you've broken it down, and students have worked day by day for a couple weeks to produce really awesome writing pieces. So what happens when you get to the state writing test and they have to produce a piece in just a few short hours? So that's what we're talking about in the video today. I'm going to walk you through how to get your students to write independently and do their best on the state writing test. The first mistake that we make when we're prepping our students for the state writing test is that we will give them prompts and have them write over and over and over again. And we focus a lot on analyzing the prompt, which is a great skill, but we're burning students out and teaching them to work quickly instead of working efficiently and producing a good writing piece. In my classroom, preparing for the writing test is a collaborative process. So we are still working as a whole group to start with, but we're looking at how we are going to tackle this together and breaking it into manageable chunks. So we're not worrying about rushing students over and over again through these sample prompts. We're working together to really analyze the prompt, move through the process, and then do another few key things that we don't normally do during our regular writing units. One of the things that we don't normally do during our regular writing units is to use a timer. So what we do in our writing test prep is set a timer for each part of the writing process. Now, when I do this with my students, I talk to them about how we're not doing this to rush them through a piece, but we're doing it so that they can actually set themselves up for success by properly distributing their time. So it depends on how much time you have for your writing test. If it's 5 hours, we need to work with our students as a whole group to practice, kind of setting up maybe 15 minutes for our brainstorming, maybe 10 minutes for our brainstorming, maybe 20 for our planning, just however it would work out best with the time that you have. And remind students that, hey, if you have extra time during that little time allotment, maybe you've rushed through it too quickly. So it's not necessarily about beating the clock, but maybe saying, hey, I've still got 5 minutes left and I'm supposed to be doing my planning. Maybe I need to go through and check my organization, make a couple small tweaks. And that way we're really focusing also on the quality of each step of the process, but also not getting stuck on a specific step for way too long. It's also really important to not make too many complicated steps for your students. So what I would do is sit down and write down the steps your students are going to need in their writing process for their test. So analyzing the prompt, brainstorming, planning, introduction paragraphs, and see how you can condense those steps into a way that it seems manageable for students. They can, on their hand, count the steps, and they can also repeat those steps back to you, and you can also set your time for each step. And that way when they get to the test, they can use the clock if they have access to the clock, but at least kind of know the pacing that they have and what those steps are and about how long each one should take. The next thing that I do is use simple organizers. So I don't want to use an organizer with my students that they won't be able to reproduce on the test. I also don't want to use an organizer with my students that they're not familiar with. So we take our past organizers and we make sure not only are they simple and easy to use, but they also are specific for each step. So one example of this is for a long time, I taught writing using a lot of circle maps. So we just made a circle, we put whatever was in the middle, and students wrote to it. We would do that for every type of writing and every step of the way. And unfortunately, this made it so that when my students got to the writing test, they were all drawing circles, but they didn't know what to do with them because there were so many different possibilities. So it's really important when you're teaching the writing process to have an organizer that really gives them important information on what they need to be putting on it so that they understand what goes on it, but also that it's super simple so that they can reproduce it. Okay, so I said I work in a whole group to help my students pace out the writing process. We don't do that over and over and over again. We usually do that once. So from there, what we do is we move into the students reproducing this in a small group. And so we'll group up all our tables, students will kind of work together, they'll talk through the process. Obviously, they can't do that on the test, but our goal is to move them from working in whole group all the way to independence. So we kind of work on one small group. It's pretty fun because students get to be involved and remind each other of the steps and time each other. It's really just fun practice. Then what I do is I move students towards working in partners, and then I move them towards independent writing. Now, every step of this process is one writing piece. We're analyzing the prompt, we are timing, we are trying to make sure that we're reproducing what the test will be like. But from the small group all the way to the independent writing, I'm using some of that time to pull students into small groups, and we're working on writing interventions. So writing interventions, they're just lessons that I do in small group for students that need them in particular. These are lessons like working on a particular grammar topic that they're really struggling with, like fragments and run-ons, or it can be something structural like elaboration, paragraph writing, organization, things that are going to make a huge difference on their writing test. So a lot of students still have gaps to fill in, and that's what we're using this intervention time for. So small group interventions is the best thing you can do for your students because it's not only filling in their time with actual helpful practice that they need because they haven't mastered the skill, but it's also preparing them for the test. So I'm always about not wasting their time on test prep. I want to use our time wisely so that they're learning and growing while also preparing for the test. If you're a little overwhelmed by the idea of doing interventions, check the link in the description because I'm going to link to my writing interventions library where you can get access to all of our interventions that we use with students. Again, these are things from organization, elaboration, to things that are very commonly an issue like writing stamina. So definitely check that out. And my last tip is just to have fun. Make sure that this is an engaging process with fun writing prompts. Your students are able to interact with each other. Everything you do doesn't need to mimic the testing situation because students will get burnt out. So make sure that this is a really fun time in your classroom while we're practicing for the test. Make sure it's meaningful and make sure that it is teaching students important skills that they can use on their test and not worrying too much about doing the same test process over and over and over again. If this was helpful, please subscribe, set the notifications bell so that you can see all of my upcoming videos. I'll be talking more about test prep and how to make it engaging, as well as talking about more end of the year topics. And if you have any questions at all, leave them in the comments. I'm happy to answer any of your questions about writing test prep. Writing is my absolute favorite to teach, but when test prep time comes, it gets very stressful still. So I'm here to answer any questions that you have. And all of the links mentioned are in the description, so definitely check out the description before you leave.